I thought, this will fox it. So then I can remember, George, I walked up the street to the letterbox, and I was so reluctant to put this letter in, but I walked around and around this letterbox, scared to touch it, because and I can remember putting that letter in, and it fell into the bottom of the box, and it was like my life fell in there with it. I just was terrorized at the thought of it, the thought of it. I didn't have any money. I didn't have anything at all. And so anyway, my plan didn't work. They invited me for an interview anyway, despite the lateness of the hour, and I went there and I prayed and I prayed and I prayed and I said, Lord, if they accept me, I'm going to go. So I went and to the interview, and they accepted me. My prayers didn't work. And I thought, well, how am I going to pay? It's a fee-paying college. How do you pay? What do you do when you have the call of God on you? All you can do is either say no or yes.
Yeah.
And I said yes. So I had to stop my degree course partway through. It really didn't help, but I'd taken Student of the Year in my university course. And then my poor parents, I stopped that halfway through and go off to Bible college. So I owned a car, and I owned a life assurance policy, which I'd had. It was like an investment policy. I cashed in that little investment policy, and it paid for the first term's fees at college. And I thought to myself, well, I can sell my car, and that will pay for my second term's fees at Bible college. And then I'm done. I've got nothing. And so it's up to God. And so what I did was this. I made two decisions. The first was, but I would keep meticulous accounts. So I kept an account of every single penny I received, and I paid tithes on everything. I thought, the first thing is this: if I want God to help me, I've got to trust him. So 10% of everything which came in, which was nearly nothing, 10% of it went out as an offering, all right? That was the first thing. And the second thing I decided was this: but I would never, ever tell anyone I was in need. I just made a decision that if God's going to help me, God's going to help me, not them. I'm not going to ask people to bail me out, And I made a third decision, which was brutally abused. I made a third decision that while ever I had petrol in that car and somebody needed to go somewhere, I would take it. And it was horribly abused, that was.
Was that in the days when petrol was less than £1?
Yeah, wasn't it just? I tell you what, today it would be enough to frighten you to death, wouldn't it?
So anyway, you were halfway to being an engineer, and you had the call of God to go to Bible college. So you decided to follow God and go to Bible college. What were your aspirations or hopes in going to Bible college? What did you hope to achieve?
Well, this is a very serious question, because I had a problem. You see, I was a part of the church called Assemblies of God at the time. And in Assemblies of God, there's only one model of ministry, and that is you're going to pastor a church. Now, I felt a call of God on me to give my life to serve Christ full time, but I was not to be a church pastor. So I'm, well, that's great, isn't it? Because the only model there is that. And I felt strongly right from the first day, this is not a call. I'm not going to lead a church. And so as much as I was stepping out into the unknown, going somewhere I never knew, and having no resources at all, I was also stepping out into the unknown. I didn't have a clue what the future held. I just knew that I needed, I felt this was the first step. It's a little bit like you get in the scripture where Abraham, is called to go to a place he does not know. That's the call of God. And so that was me. So I went off to Bible college and studied hard,
Was that Mattersey Bible College you went to?
Yes, it was Mattersey Bible College.
I know it quite well. Yeah, my daughter went there.
Yeah.
It's interesting. When I went to Bible college, they teach more than the Bible. Bible college, is that correct? They teach other things.
Yeah, mostly it was scripture.
Mm-hmm.
And and how to preach and I was learning Greek and that sort of stuff, but mostly it was scripture. And my father-in-law, sorry, my father-in-law, who was not my father-in-law at the time, he was one of the lecturers there, and he came and he lectured us on John's Gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so impressed with him that after one of the lectures, I called him to one side and I asked him if during the summer break I could come and work with him, so that I could, because I didn't have anywhere else to go, George. I wasn't welcome at home. I did have a car though. I still had my car. I didn't have to sell it. I never had to sell my car. That was the end of that story. I left Bible college. I'd bought the 2 most expensive suits I'd ever bought in my life. And all the school fees were paid, and I still had my car, and I still didn't ever have to tell anyone that I needed anything.
That's incredible.
Trusting God, and this is a thing, see, why it's so important, is it puts a foundation in for you. A foundation is something which is solid and out of sight. Nobody can see it. It doesn't look pretty, but you can build on it.
Yeah.
And that's what that did for me, that trust in God. I tell you, a number of times I ran to see if there was any post, and there was no post, again. But yet, amazingly, you got through.
And did you feel it as a lonely journey, because you said you were very independent, all you guys were independent. Was that a hindrance or a help to you?
Well, it's a classic thing, George, isn't it? It's both. It's always both,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't need a lot of people around, but I do need a very few people around.
Yeah.
And, without those few people, I'd be very lonely. But I'm not a crowd person at all. I like to be quiet. I'm not like you, George, shouting your mouth off all the time.
Life Stories Worldwide is on YouTube, and it's very easy to subscribe to our channel. Just click the bell and subscribe, and receive notifications of when we are live, or simply watch any of our other videos. So check it out and give us a visit. Okay, so you went to Bible college. You did your 2 years. You qualified, or you got your degree or whatever. So what did you do after that? You didn't want to be a pastor. So where did you take your teaching?
Well, here's the thing. You see, I went to work with my father-in-law during the summer period between the years. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
He's my father-in-law now. He wasn't then, and I went to work with him. I said, "Can I come and work with you during the summer?" And he said, "Okay." He was very gracious. And so I went, and I thought, great, I'll learn some stuff, But what I didn't know was he takes most of the summer off.
Okay.
So the longest I spent with him in that summer period was when we had lunch together on my way back to college. The day I went back to college. He completely conned me. But anyways, so of course, it's a very good thing to do, is to teach independence. What are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
You can't sit around all day, have cups of tea and talk, can you?
No.
You're meant to be working for the Lord. And so he was teaching a bit of independence there. But anyway, after the end of the second year, I went and I became his assistant for 13 years. And basically I just did whatever he didn't want to do. I stepped in wherever I could to help him. But here's the thing, that as soon as I got there, I met a gentleman by the name of Charles and another guy by the name of John. And John was a businessman and Charles was a journalist. And Charles was writing a little tract called New Life. And I said to him, Charles, what we ought to do is we ought to get your tract, we ought to print it on newsprint, and we want to put it in every door in Sheffield. And, he said, great idea. Any journalist, let me tell you, if you're going to put them out widely, they'll say yes. And John, the businessman, he was enthusiastic. And me, the only thing I brought to the party really was I was too stupid to not understand that it couldn't be done. That was the only thing I brought to the party. And I'm very determined. And so we set out and we started New Life newspaper. And the aim was to put it into every home in Sheffield. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to do it every month, and we couldn't attain that. So we did it every 2 months. We put out New Life into every home in Sheffield, which was, at that time, we started with 200,000 copies. I can remember the first delivery, and they piled them in one side of the church. And it was like this immense haystack of newsprint, And I almost wept. I mean, how do you distribute that lot? Mm-hmm. Talk about not knowing you can't be done. But we called on every believer in Sheffield who would help us. We got them to help us, and because the vision was this, but it's a Christian newspaper, okay, funded by advertising, but delivered by Christians. That was the vision, you see. And mm-hmm. So, because Christians can pray, so you take them out. And we did that for about 18 months. We did an issue about every 2 months, and it virtually killed us. I got married to, I got my father-in-law back by stealing his daughter off him. And for 18 months, we put those out, and it just about killed us all. And Charles moved on to something else, and John died. He was much older, and he didn't die tragically. He went to his reward. I think his reward was to get away from me, actually. But there we go. And I was left holding the baby, and that's 40 years ago now. And I'm still holding the baby, and it's still a baby.
So that was the beginning of your introduction to New Life Publishing.
Exactly. And I have now for 40 years been publishing the gospel, and I've realized the wisdom of God, but the call of God was to give myself full time to the ministry, but not to be a church minister.
Good idea. Now tell us a little bit how you met your wife in that particular time as well. How that came about.
Well, that's a story for you. My wife grew up as a child of a pastor, and she was utterly determined that she was not going to be a pastor's wife. And she tried to palm me off with every other girl in church, And obviously she was way out of my league. I mean, I was a little bloke from nowhere. I came from a farm in Devon, where you couldn't see the next house from our place. That was it. And along I come, and I meet this fantastic young lady. Oh my goodness me. It took me, and also worse than that, it was mutual loathing on first sight. We hated each other. But here's the thing. I liked her a lot quicker than she liked me. I had to work hard, I can tell you. And a preacher friend from America made this famous prophecy. He said, "You'll never win her." And he tries to say now, but all he was doing was provoking me. No, he was prophesying doom. And I proved him wrong. And 40 years later, I'm still proving him wrong. And I'm delighted, I can tell you. Helen's been, she's been everything to me.
Excellent. So also, you said you were for 13 years, you were assistant pastor. What was life like as an assistant pastor?
Well, I could say some things there.
Actually, tell us a few stories.
Actually, we're both, Mr. Mercy, Helen's daddy, is very determined gentleman, and so am I. And you can't tell now very easily, but I was very redheaded, and but only twice did we ever have a heavy argument. I think I can't begin to tell you how highly I esteem my time with Helen's dad. He's outstanding in my view, and he's now 90 and slowing down, and it doesn't seem right. I think of him as a complete go-getter all the time, you know.
Well, see, would you say that he was one of your heroes, or was there any other heroes in your life growing up?
Well, he's definitely one of my heroes. I felt that I grew up with Helen's dad, yeah.
Lifestories Worldwide is broadcast live every Monday night at 8 p.m. UK time. We broadcast on YouTube, Facebook, and StreamYard. Why not join us every Monday night at 8 p.m. UK time for Lifestories Worldwide.
Yeah. He's outstanding, truly outstanding, man.
Excellent. Okay, so what was it in the early days when you started in Sheffield with the New Life Publishing? Was that your intention to be a publisher for the rest of your life, or did it just happen to you?
It just happened. And here's one of the great things you see about Paul Mercy. He's wise enough, all right, to say, well, something like New Life could sink a church. So what they did was they gave us space, and they gave my time, and they made it financially independent.
Wow.
So, you know, and I look back on that and I think what wisdom that was, you know, to make it stand on its own feet, but also to be helpful. And that's the mark of the guy. He's like that. He's brilliant. Truly, truly brilliant. Yeah.
So tell us then about how a New Life Publishing actually works, because you don't do everything yourself. I mean, is there a team of people, or do you have people helping you, or reporters, and where the stories come from?
In common with nearly every other publishing company, the team is very small, because in order to make publishing profitable today, particularly today, you have to have a small and lean team, because you know, we are determinedly profitable. We're not a charity, and we're not a not-for-profit. You know, I've got to live somehow, and I've got a wife to try to care for as well. And so so we have a small team, but a very, very strong small team, you know, who I pray for earnestly every day. And we, by the grace of God, we are determined to preach the gospel. Because one of the challenges, George, you'll know this with what you're doing, you know, you're trying to put stories, life stories out there, but some stories are helpful and some aren't, you know. Some stories, particularly in publishing, you know, in newspaper publishing, for example, the saying is this: if it bleeds, it leads, because it's always bad news which sells. It's always. So if somebody's, you know, run into a chainsaw, well, that's your front page story right there. You know, the news editors are rubbing their hands in glee, because the worse the story is, the further to the front it will go. But of course, in what I'm doing and what we're doing, that's not the case. And so it's a big challenge. And also, what subjects do you cover? Well, what I try to do is I try to liken each of our publications, because we do a number of publications, and I try to liken them to what section of the Bible they relate to.
Okay.
So, for example, New Life newspaper is the Gospels. So we only deal with what's in the Gospels. You know, for example, here's a hot potato. Homosexuality was rife at the time of Christ.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're aware, but it was only 40 years, I believe it was, after the death of Jesus, that the Roman emperor of the time had the law changed so that he could marry a man. You know, people think it's all new. It's not all new.
No, I know that.
It's not all new. There's nothing new under the sun. So the question is, why didn't Jesus talk about it? Because he chose not to. New Life newspaper chooses not to. We talk about the things which are in the Gospels, studiously so, because that's what Jesus talked about. And so we look for the grace of God in every area of life. So the direction, salvation, provision, healing, all of those things which a person who comes to Jesus is looking for. That's the sort of things which we cover in New Life.
So when you're talking about their publishing, so do you have a certain core of belief that you won't go beyond in publishing stories? Like, for instance, if somebody from another religion came to you and said, look, can you publish a story for me? What way would you handle that?
Well, the New Life is a Christian newspaper.
Okay.
It's unashamedly Christian. So we're not a religious newspaper. For example, it was a good example. Every issue of New Life, we have sport at the back, and a lot of sports people, particularly footballers today, are out and out Christians. They're coming and they're strong believers in the Lord. And then there was one gentleman, I looked up his story, and when he scores a goal, he looks up to heaven and he points up into the sky and he blows a kiss or something like that. And so you find out, and you dig, you do your research, and finally you find out why. And it's because his mother's passed away and he imagines her watching him. Well, that's not Christian. It may be very warm and welcoming to him. I'm not trying it at all, but I'm not going to publish it because it's not what we find in the Gospels. And so there it is. Decision made. Move on.
So in becoming an editor, you obviously decide what goes in and what goes out. Do you edit the stories themselves, or do you take them as they're sent to you?
Well, as far as I can, this is my ambition speaking now. As far as I can, I never write anything. Right? Anything. Oh dear. But I'm responsible for every word which goes out. If you ever talk to people who are in publishing, you will discover that they're very serious about their responsibilities. Let me give you an illustration. All right, New Life newspaper. This is many years ago, but I remember it vividly. A person called me, and they called me to tell me that one of the sentences in New Life newspaper had a comma in the wrong place, they felt.
Was it Alan Jones by any chance?
It was not Alan Jones, but it could have been. I don't know. I'm not going to drop him in it. But so this person called me to say that the comma was in the wrong place, because if we moved the comma to a different place in the sentence, it made the sentence read differently, and that was what they felt it should be. George, that story was on page 9 of New Life, and we had published it 5 years earlier. 5 years before that. And I tell you, when you're in publishing, you understand, you become aware that print has a life all of its own, and it stays out there. And people, I mean, that guy bent my ear because he felt we'd put a comma in the wrong place. And I
get that every week, by the way.
I have to say, with the greatest of respect, we think it's in the right place. That's the way it is. So you learn to become fastidious, oh dear, painstaking. You check everything because you don't want to have to pull back a story and say we got it wrong.
Yeah.
You just don't want to.
If you would like to speak to us here at Life Stories Worldwide Radio, you can simply by dialing +44 7943 550287. Call us now